The stars stretched across the black canvas of space, millions of tiny lights forming a backdrop to the bustling activity of the Galactic Federation. In this vast community of alien races, humans had carved out their own unique place, though not the one they might have hoped for. "The humans retreat again," growled Captain Drux of the Torgan battleship. His massive scaled hand crushed the report tablet. "Is there no fight in these soft creatures?" Around the command bridge, other Torgans, all towering armored warriors with ridgeback scales, nodded in agreement. The sentiment echoed throughout the Federation's military forces. Humans were useful for their technical skills and trade networks, but when battle called, they were notoriously quick to back away. In the grand halls of the Federation Council on Nexus Station, Ambassador Ward of Earth stood quietly as insults flew. The Veldari representative, a tall, crystalline being, spoke with a voice like chiming bells. "Perhaps our human friends would prefer to send strongly worded messages to the pirates rather than ships." The chamber filled with the various sounds of alien laughter. Ward simply nodded, neither defending nor denying the accusation. This was the way of things, had been for the 30 years since humans joined the Federation. Earth's forces were small compared to the mighty fleets of older races. Humans couldn't match the natural armor of the Torgans or the psychic defenses of the Veldari. They couldn't match the speed of the bird-like Avon or the raw strength of the massive Brontons. What humans did have was something the other races failed to recognize as valuable: caution. "They call us cowards," said Fleet Admiral Ben Turner as he studied the holographic star map in Earth Command. Gray-haired and weathered, Turner had endured decades of slights from Federation allies. "Let them. I'd rather have living crews than dead heroes." His second-in-command, Commander Rhea Davis, nodded as she manipulated the display to show the latest pirate activity near the Outer Rim. "The Torgans lost 3 ships taking that outpost. We could have done it without losing any." "But it would have taken 3 weeks instead of 1 day, Turner sighed. "And that's not how the warrior races think." The reputation of humanity spread throughout the stars. Humans were traders, diplomats, engineers, and medics. They built remarkable ships and stations. They created art that even the most alien minds could appreciate. They were welcome at any port or colony. But they were not warriors, not in the way the Federation respected. Engage only when necessary. Retreat when prudent. Find solutions that preserve life. Read the Human Space Force Manual. These weren't the words etched on the walls of Torgan war academies or Veldari strategic colleges. On the frontier colony of New Hope, Mike Cooper oversaw the installation of the settlement's defensive systems. Unlike the weapon-heavy approaches of other races, the human colony focused on early detection, multiple layers of shields, and escape routes for civilians. "Building ratways instead of walls," mocked a visiting Bronton engineer, his voice deep and rumbling. Cooper just smiled. "We call it redundancy. Defense in depth." The Bronton didn't understand, but Cooper didn't mind. None of them understood that humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other before reaching the stars. They had learned hard lessons about the true cost of war, about the folly of glorious last stands and suicidal charges. In the quiet of his office later that night, Fleet Admiral Turner received a priority transmission from a scout ship patrolling beyond the Federation's borders. The young captain's face was pale, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Admiral, we've detected something. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Massive organic structures, hundreds of them, moving as one. They've already consumed an uninhabited system. They're heading toward Federation space." Turner watched the attached sensor readings, a chill running down his spine. "Return immediately, Captain. Maintain communications blackout, except for secure channels to Earth Command." The transmission ended, and Turner sat alone in the darkness. The other races thought humans cowardly for their caution, their careful planning, their reluctance to engage. Soon they would learn that there was a world of difference between cowardice and prudence, and humanity's greatest strength was about to become the galaxy's last hope. 3 Federation weeks after Admiral Turner received the Scout's warning, the Void Swarm struck. The Torgan border station Valor's Edge detected the strange readings first. Massive organic shapes, like living ships, approached their sector. True to their warrior culture, the Torgans sent no distress call. Instead, they launched their full battle group to meet this new enemy head-on. "Let the galaxy remember this day," roared Commander Grax as his flagship led the charge. When Torgan warriors met death with honor. The battle lasted just under 4 hours. It was not broadcast across Federation channels. There were no glorious victory announcements. There was only silence, then desperate emergency beacons, then nothing at all. 27 Torgan warships, the pride of their fleet, destroyed without a single enemy casualty. The Federation Council erupted into chaos. "We must assemble the combined fleet," bellowed the Bronton representative. "Send our psychic corps to probe their minds," suggested the Veldari. "Establish a defensive line at the XR7 Nebula," shouted others. In the midst of the panic, the human delegation sat quietly, their faces grim but composed. Ambassador Ward looked at the tactical displays showing the swarm's movements, making notes and sending messages to Earth Command. General Drav of the Avon forces noticed this calm and chirped angrily, his feathers ruffling. "Do the humans have nothing to offer in this time of crisis, or perhaps you plan to run before the fighting even begins?" Ward looked up slowly. "We are analyzing the data from the Torgan encounter. There's something unusual about the attack patterns." "Analysis," scoffed Drav. "While you analyze, the enemy advances. This is why humans will never be true warriors." Far from the council chambers, the human science vessel Curiosity maintained position just outside scanner range of the advancing swarm. Captain Emma Ray studied the readings with intense focus while her ship remained under strict emissions control, nearly invisible against the background of space. "Look at the movement patterns," she told her science officer, Mark Wells. "They're not random. The way they change direction, the timing of their accelerations, it's almost like a pulse." Wells nodded, his eyes never leaving the displays. "Like a heartbeat, or a neural firing sequence." "Exactly. We're not looking at individual ships. We're looking at cells in a single organism." Ray tapped commands into her console. "Send this data package to Admiral Turner, encrypted channel. I think we may be the only ones who've noticed this." At that same moment, the combined fleet of the Federation was assembling. Impressive warships from a dozen worlds formed battle lines according to traditional strategies developed over centuries of interspecies conflicts. Massive Bronton dreadnoughts anchored the center, with fast Avon strike craft on the flanks and Veldari psychic ships providing support. The human contingent, under Admiral Turner, arrived last. Their ships were smaller, less heavily armed, but equipped with advanced scanning technology and highly maneuverable. They took position at the rear of the formation. "As expected," muttered a Bronton commander over an open channel. "Humans protecting their retreat path." Admiral Turner ignored the comment. On his command ship, Defiance, he studied the data from Captain Ray and made his decision. "All human vessels, implement Protocol Shadow." I repeat, implement Protocol Shadow. Across the battlefield, human ships began to pull back further, increasing the distance between themselves and the main fleet. The move did not go unnoticed. "The humans abandon us before the battle even begins." The Federation command channel erupted with angry voices. What they couldn't see was that each human ship was deploying specialized sensor drones, creating a vast observation network around the coming battlefield. They weren't retreating. They were widening their perspective. The swarm appeared on the edge of the system, a writhing mass of organic ship forms moving together like schools of predatory fish. The Federation fleet opened fire at maximum range. From his position, Turner watched in grim silence. The swarm absorbed the first salvos without slowing. When they returned fire, It wasn't with conventional weapons, but with biological projectiles that attached to Federation ships and began to dissolve their hulls. "Record everything," Turner ordered. "Every attack pattern, every response, every weakness. This isn't a battle we can win today." As the proud Federation fleet broke apart under the swarm's onslaught, the human ships watched, learned, and quietly withdrew, carrying with them the data that would be the galaxy's only hope. Human cowards. They desert us in our time of need. The accusation echoed through the emergency Federation Council meeting. 2 weeks had passed since the combined fleet's devastating defeat. 3 more systems had fallen to the Void Swarm. The Federation was in full retreat. Admiral Lisa Reeves stood before the hostile council, her uniform crisp despite not having slept in days. Behind her was a small team of human analysts, their faces showing exhaustion but determination. "The human Space Force has withdrawn to protect our own worlds. Is that correct, Admiral?" The Velveri speaker's crystalline form glittered with barely contained anger. "No, Speaker. That is not correct." Reeves' voice remained steady. "We have withdrawn our combat vessels to implement Operation Watchful Eye." "Another fancy name for running away," growled the Torgan representative, his scared face twisted in disgust. "While the rest of us fight and die." Reeves took a deep breath. "We're not running. We're watching. And we're beginning to understand what we're facing." She nodded to her team, and a young analyst named James stepped forward with a data tablet. He tapped it, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the council chamber. "This is a composite map of all swarm movements over the past 3 weeks," James explained. "We've combined data from our sensor drones, survivor reports, and long-range scans." The map showed the swarm's path through Federation space as a series of red lines. At first glance, it looked random, the chaotic destruction of a mindless force. "Now watch what happens when we apply our pattern recognition algorithms," James continued. The display shifted, and suddenly the red lines began to pulse in sequence. Movement patterns previously hidden became clear. The swarm wasn't attacking randomly. It was moving like blood through veins, following an organized system. "The swarm is a single organism," Reeves explained. "It doesn't think like us, it doesn't fight like us, and it can't be defeated by conventional tactics." The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. "If it's an organism," the Bronton representative rumbled thoughtfully, "then it must have vital organs, centers that control it." "We believe so," Reeves nodded. "But we need more data to confirm our theory." "More data." The Torgan slammed his fist down. "While you collect data, our worlds burn." Reeves' patience finally broke. "And rushing into battle without understanding the enemy has worked so well so far, hasn't it?" Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "You called us cowards for not dying pointlessly alongside you. Now we offer you something better than death. A chance at victory." Far from the council chambers, on the edge of Federation space, Captain Jack Miller guided his scout ship Sparrow through the debris field that had once been the thriving world of New Centauri. His specialized vessel was designed for stealth, with heat sinks and sensor-dampening technology that made it nearly invisible. "Anything on scans, Lynn?" he asked his science officer. Lynn studied her readouts intently, definitely picking up communication signals between swarm elements. "It's not radio, not standard subspace. It's some kind of bioelectric field." Miller nodded. "Can we record it?" "Already am. But there's something else." Lynn's voice trailed off as she adjusted her instruments. "Captain, I'm detecting different signal patterns from different parts of the swarm. Some are stronger than others." Miller moved to look over her shoulder. "Like a hierarchy?" "Exactly. And look here." She pointed to a cluster of readings on her screen. "This group at the center of the formation is emitting signals that the others respond to. Almost like a brain," Miller finished, "or at least a command node." The Sparrow continued its silent observation for hours, recording everything. When they finally slipped away to transmit their findings, Miller felt the first stirring of hope he'd experienced since the invasion began. Back at the hidden human base established on an unmarked asteroid, Admiral Reeves reviewed the incoming data. Around her, dozens of scientists and analysts worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle of the swarm's biology and behavior. "They called us cowards," she said quietly to her aide. "But sometimes the bravest thing is to step back and think before you act." The aide nodded. "The other species fight with their muscles. We fight with our minds." On the main display, a new pattern was emerging, a map of the swarm's neural structure, revealing vulnerabilities that no one had seen before. It wasn't the glorious battle that the warrior races craved, but it was something far more valuable: a path to victory. The Federation capital world of Nexus Prime buzzed with activity, but not the kind that signaled hope. Evacuation ships filled the skies, carrying important officials, cultural treasures, and civilian refugees. After 2 months of fighting, the mighty Federation had been pushed back on all fronts. Tom Barnes, the human representative, walked through the nearly empty halls of the Grand Council chamber. Once filled with delegates from 100 worlds, now only a handful remained. "The Veldari homeworld has fallen," announced Speaker Thix, her crystalline form dimmer than usual, depleted by grief. "Their defense fleet fought bravely to the last ship." "The Torkin inner systems are under direct attack," rumbled General Kraz. "My people fight street by street, city by city. We will not surrender, even as we die." The remaining representatives shared similar news: desperate last stands, heroic defeats, worlds abandoned or lost. When they finished, all eyes turned to Barnes. "And what of the humans?" asked Thix, her tone bitter. "Still hiding, still watching." Barnes looked around the room, meeting each alien gaze. "We're ready to present our plan." A murmur passed through the chamber. Barnes stepped forward and activated the holographic display. Above the central table, a 3-dimensional map of the remaining Federation territory appeared, with the advancing swarm marked in pulsing red. "For 2 months, you've called us cowards," Barnes began. "You've fought with courage while we withdrew. You've died with honor while we've kept our distance." He paused, looking at each face in turn. "What you didn't know is that we've been building this." He tapped his control pad, and the display changed to show a detailed schematic of an enormous engineering project. Operation Pied Piper. The alien representatives leaned closer, studying the plans with confusion. "This isn't a weapon," stated Kraz bluntly. "Where are the battleships? The planet killers?" "It's not a weapon in the traditional sense," Barnes agreed. "It's a trap, and to make it work, we need to change how we fight, completely." Over the next hour, Barnes outlined the human plan. Instead of directly engaging the swarm, Federation forces would execute a series of calculated retreats and feints. Ships would appear in certain systems, broadcast specific frequencies, then withdraw before the swarm could engage. "You want us to run." Kraz's voice was dangerous, low with anger. "To show our backs to the enemy." "I want you to help us herd them," Barnes replied calmly, "like shepherds guiding a flock." The plan was complex, requiring precise timing across dozens of star systems. And most shocking of all, it required the Federation to deliberately abandon certain worlds, to use them as bait. "This is madness," whispered a representative from the Avon Collective. "You ask us to sacrifice entire planets." "Evacuated planets," Barnes corrected. "No sentient life left behind. And yes, we'll lose infrastructure, resources, even history, but we'll preserve what matters most: our people. And we'll gain a chance to defeat the swarm." "What makes you think this will even work?" demanded Thix. Barnes nodded to a human woman who had been quietly standing at the back of the room. She stepped forward, introducing herself as Dr. Meyer Wright, lead cynobiologist for the human science team. "The swarm operates on biological imperatives," she explained. "It seeks energy and biomass to consume, following the path of least resistance toward the richest targets. We've mapped its response patterns with thousands of data points. With the right stimuli, we can guide it, not control it, but influence its path. She displayed simulation models showing how the swarm had responded to different types of signals and bait. The patterns were clear, even to the non-scientists in the room. "And where exactly are we hurting this monster?" asked Kraz. Barnes changed the display again, showing a binary star system near the edge of Federation space. "Helios," he said simply, "where our engineers have been working in secret since the day the swarm appeared." The room fell silent as the representatives studied the human plan. It wasn't a glorious last stand. It didn't promise honor in battle or songs of heroic sacrifice. It offered something much harder to accept: calculated withdrawal, patience, and the abandonment of pride. "Your plan gives us a 63% chance of success," Fix finally said, studying the numbers. "Conventional tactics offer only 8% survival probability." Barnes nodded. "Sometimes the bravest action isn't charging forward. Sometimes it's knowing when to step back." After a long silence, General Kraz spoke, his voice unexpectedly quiet. "My warriors know how to die with honor. Perhaps it's time we learned how to live with wisdom." He looked up at Barnes. "The Torgans will follow your plan." One by one, the other representatives agreed. Operation Pied Piper would begin. The bridge of the Federation cruiser Steadfast was silent except for the low hum of equipment. Captain Alex Reed watched the main view screen as his ship drifted through the abandoned mining colony of Terrace IV. Behind him, his mostly human crew worked with quiet efficiency. "Timer reads 53 minutes until swarm arrival," reported his first officer, Kate Wilson. Reed nodded. "Begin activation sequence for the beacons." Across the Terrace system, specialized transmitters came to life, broadcasting the unique energy signature that the human scientists had determined would attract the swarm. It was like ringing a dinner bell for a hungry predator. "Beacons active, Captain," Wilson confirmed. "Evacuation of all personnel is complete." "Excellent. Now we wait," Reed said. Their role in Operation Pied Piper was simple but dangerous. Lure the swarm to this system, let it begin feeding on the abandoned equipment and resources, then activate the second phase of beacons exactly 17 minutes later before making a rapid withdrawal. Similar operations were happening across 28 other systems, each team following a precise schedule calculated by the most powerful quantum computers humanity had brought to the stars. The timing was critical, too early or too late, and the entire operation would fail. "Incoming transmission from command," announced the communications officer. Admiral Reeves' face appeared on a secondary screen. Despite the strain of the past weeks, she looked confident. "Status report, Captain Reed." "On schedule, Admiral. Beacons active, evacuation complete. Awaiting swarm arrival." "Good. Remember, don't get heroic on me. The moment Phase 2 is complete, you get out of there." Reed smiled slightly. "No heroics, ma'am. Just precise timing and a fast exit. The human way." On the Federation capital, now largely evacuated, General Kraz of the Torgans watched the tactical displays with growing frustration. Dozens of small engagements scattered across space, ships appearing and disappearing, abandoning position after position. "This doesn't feel like war," he growled to Tom Barnes, who stood beside him in the command center. "It feels like dancing." Barnes nodded. "That's not a bad analogy. We're leading the swarm through the steps of a dance, our dance, not theirs. And if they refuse to follow, then we adjust," Barnes said simply. "The beauty of this plan is its flexibility. We're not trying to overpower the swarm. We're working with its nature, using its strengths against it." Kraz shook his massive head. "My warriors stand ready at the Helios system, but they grow restless with waiting." "They'll have their battle," Barnes assured him. "But only when everything is in place." Throughout Federation space, ships played their parts in the complex operation. Some broadcast signals to attract swarm elements. others to repel them. Some systems were sacrificed as feeding grounds, slowing the swarm's advance as it consumed the abandoned resources. Others were defended just enough to nudge the collective organism in the desired direction. For many Federation species, this indirect approach felt wrong, like trickery rather than honest combat. But as weeks passed and the pattern on the tactical displays began to shift, even the most skeptical warriors had to admit the human plan was working. "Look," Barnes said one day, pointing to the main strategic display in the command center. "The swarm's movement pattern is changing." The massive red blob representing the main body of the swarm had indeed altered course. Instead of continuing its push toward the most populated Federation worlds, it had begun to drift toward the outer regions, toward Helios. "It's responding to the gradient we created," explained Dr. Wright, who had joined them. "Each beacon, each engagement, each abandoned resource cache, they all create a pattern of stimuli that the swarm can't resist. It's like flowing water finding the path of least resistance." "How long until it reaches Helios?" asked Speaker Thix, who had remained despite the evacuation orders. "At current speeds, 3 days," Wright replied. "Exactly as calculated." For the first time since the invasion began, smiles appeared on tired faces. The dance was working. Aboard the Steadfast, now safely withdrawn to the rendezvous point, Captain Reed watched the data streams showing the swarm's movements. "I never thought I'd say this," his first officer remarked, "but I'm actually glad we humans have a reputation for running away." Reed nodded. "Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to not fight at all, at least, not the way everyone expects." The massive collective organism that had terrified the galaxy was moving inexorably toward the trap prepared for it, not driven by force, but led by the subtle manipulations of the species everyone had called cowards. The twin suns of Helios burned bright against the darkness of space. Around them orbited a complex web of stations and satellites that had not existed 3 months earlier. This was the culmination of Operation Pied Piper, a massive engineering project built while the rest of the Federation fought and died. Fleet Commander John Parker stood on the observation deck of Command Station Alpha, watching as the final preparations were completed. His weathered face showed the strain of sleepless nights and endless work, but his eyes held steady determination. "Status report," he ordered. "Solar harnesses are at 98% capacity," reported Chief Engineer Maria Foster. "Containment fields are online and stable. All ships report ready status." Parker nodded. "And our allies?" "Torgan Battle Group is in position, cloaked behind the third moon. Veldari psychic ships are maintaining the sensory barrier. Everyone is where they should be." Around the binary stars, human ingenuity had constructed something unprecedented. Massive solar harnesses designed to capture and redirect the energy of stellar flares. The technology had been experimental before the war, deemed too costly and complex for practical use. Now, it was their best hope. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Reeves," announced the communications officer. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. "The swarm has entered the Helios system. Operation Pied Piper has succeeded." They took the bait. Parker allowed himself a small smile. "We're ready, Admiral." "Remember, timing is everything," Reeves cautioned. "The harnesses must activate simultaneously. Too early, and the swarm might detect the trap. Too late, and they'll be too dispersed for maximum effect." "Understood. We'll make it count." The screen went dark, and Parker turned to his crew. "Battle stations. Begin final countdown." Throughout the station, humans and their alien allies moved with purpose. The tension was palpable, but there was none of the glory-seeking or battle lust that characterized traditional Federation combat operations. This was calculated, precise, and methodical, the human way of war. On the tactical display, the swarm appeared as a massive cloud entering the system. Its organic ships spread out, drawn to the seemingly abandoned mining stations and orbital platforms scattered around the twin stars. "They're taking the bait," Foster observed. moving exactly as predicted. Parker watched as the swarm engulfed orbital station after orbital station, breaking them down for resources. The collective organism had no way of knowing that each structure had been carefully positioned to draw it into a specific formation around the binary stars. Swarm distribution at 64% optimal coverage, reported the tactical officer. 67%, 70%. Parker's hand hovered over the activation control. Everything depended on this moment. Months of planning, countless sacrifices, the future of the Federation itself. 85%, 90%. We've reached minimal threshold for activation. Not yet, Parker said firmly. We need maximum effect. The minutes stretched painfully as the swarm continued to spread around the twin stars, consuming the bait left for it. 95%, 97%, 98%. Parker took a deep breath. Transmit activation code now. The command went out, racing through encrypted channels to the massive solar harnesses built around both Helios suns. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the stars flickered. Twin solar flares erupted simultaneously, their energy captured and channeled through the human-built harnesses. But instead of heat or radiation, the harnesses converted the stellar energy into a precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulse, one specifically designed to disrupt the bioelectric communication the swarm depended on. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The organized pattern of the swarm collapsed into chaos. Individual ship organisms spun and drifted, their coordinated movements replaced by random, panicked reactions. "It's working," Foster exclaimed. Neural disruption confirmed across 92% of swarm elements. Parker allowed no celebration. Signal the fleet. Phase 2 begins now. Across the Helios system, Federation ships emerged from hiding, but they did not attack with conventional weapons. Instead, they activated specialized tractor beams and containment fields, systematically herding the disoriented swarm elements into predetermined sectors. "Like shepherds with very confused sheep," muttered one officer as they watched the operation unfold. The Torgan warships, led by General Kraz himself, formed a protective perimeter, ready to destroy any swarm elements that broke free. But their weapons remained silent. For the first time in Torgan history, a battle was being won without firing a shot. "Containment at 62% and rising," reported the tactical officer. "The disorientation effect is holding steady." Parker finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "Send word to Admiral Reeves. The trap worked. The swarm is neutralized." Around him, humans and aliens alike broke into cheers and embraces. It wasn't the glorious victory the warrior races had dreamed of, but it was something far more valuable, a victory with minimal casualties, one that might even allow them to understand their enemy rather than simply destroy it. "The cowardly humans," Parker said quietly to himself, a small smile on his lips. "Who'd have thought?" 1 year after the Battle of Helios, the Grand Council chamber of the Federation looked very different. Where once the representatives had sat according to military might, now they gathered in a circle, symbolizing a new approach to galactic cooperation. Captain Jack Miller stood before them, no longer commanding a scout ship, but leading the Swarm Research Division. The past year had transformed him. His face was leaner, his eyes sharper, but there was an energy in his movements that spoke of discovery rather than exhaustion. "Representatives of the Federation," he began, "today marks the completion of our initial communication protocols with the contained swarm elements." A murmur passed through the chamber. Many still found it difficult to believe that the terrible enemy that had nearly destroyed them was now an object of study rather than destruction. "What have you learned, Captain?" asked Speaker Thix of the Veldari. Her crystalline form had regained its brilliance in the months of peace. Miller activated the holographic display, showing complex neural patterns and biological structures. "The swarm is not what we thought. It's not a mindless destroyer. It's a refugee." The chamber erupted in confused questions. Miller raised his hand for silence. Our xenobiologists have decoded enough of its neural patterns to understand its origins. The swarm evolved in a dying galaxy, one consumed by expanding black holes. It developed its collective consciousness and consumption patterns as survival mechanisms in an environment of scarcity. He showed images of the swarm's component organisms, highlighting their intricate biological systems. When it entered our galaxy, it behaved the only way it knew how, consuming everything in its path to survive. It didn't recognize our communications as coming from sentient beings. To the swarm, we were just more resources. General Kraz of the Torgans, his battle armor replaced by more ceremonial dress, leaned forward. "You speak as if this monster has feelings, Captain." "Not feelings as we understand them," Miller clarified. "But it does have awareness, purpose, and most importantly, the capacity to learn and adapt. Since its containment, we've been teaching it to recognize other forms of life." Teaching it. The Bronton representative sounded skeptical. "Like a pet?" Miller smiled slightly. "More like establishing diplomatic relations with a very alien intelligence. The communication is difficult, but progress is real." On the massive view screen, he showed footage from the containment zone. Swarm elements no longer chaotically trying to escape, but forming orderly patterns, responding to signals from the research team. "We believe that within another year, we can establish enough mutual understanding to propose coexistence. The swarm doesn't need to consume sentient worlds. It can be directed toward uninhabited systems rich in resources it needs." The council sat in stunned silence. The idea of making peace with the terror that had nearly destroyed them was revolutionary, and yet undeniably human in its approach. Tom Barnes, now elevated to Federation High Commissioner, stood up. "This outcome was possible only because we chose understanding over destruction. When we designed Operation Pied Piper, we included containment fields instead of focusing solely on weapons of war. That choice has given us not just victory, but new knowledge." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each representative. "The Federation has always valued strength in battle. Today, I propose we also recognize strength in restraint, wisdom in caution, and courage in choosing the harder path of understanding." The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, General Kraz stood up. The massive Torgan warrior towered over the other representatives. "When the swarm first appeared," he rumbled, "I called humans cowards for their careful approach. I was wrong." He placed a heavy hand on Barnes' shoulder. "My people have learned much from yours this past year. The Human Strategic Institute now trains Torgan officers alongside those of all Federation species." He turned to address the whole council. "We called it calculated courage. This human way of fighting. But I think a better name is simply wisdom. The wisdom to know when to charge forward and when to step back. The wisdom to seek understanding before destruction." Across the Federation, the changes were evident. Planets were being rebuilt, but differently than before. Defense systems now incorporated human-designed early warning networks and multiple fallback positions. Military academies taught strategic withdrawal alongside heroic charges. And in orbit around the twin stars of Helios, human scientists continued their patient work, building bridges of understanding with an alien consciousness that had come to their galaxy as a threat, but might remain as a neighbor. As the council session ended, Miller found himself standing next to a young Torgan officer. "Is it true what they say?" the Torgan asked. "That before humans joined the Federation, you fought wars against yourselves for thousands of years?" Miller nodded. "Our history is filled with battles." "Then how did you learn this? Patience. This preference for caution over confrontation." Miller looked out at the stars visible through the council chamber's vast windows. "We learned it through bitter experience, that the most glorious victories often come at too high a cost. That running away sometimes takes more courage than standing your ground." He smiled at the young Torgan. "We were never cowards. We were just playing the long game." Around them, the Federation continued its work of rebuilding and renewal. forever changed by the moment when the so-called cowardly humans had stepped up to save them all.